Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 24th of July 2016. Now this is a continuation of, it's actually part 4 of a severe study of Pandora's dreams may preserve sanity from cabal schemes. And it's really about constant conflict and perception management continuation, to show you how we're really living through a life of continuous change. It's planned in advance by those who own you and own everything else. It's really just the way it is. And they have all the think tanks to make sure they get what they want. They have it all planned out, of course. And the whole secret of power is never to allow anything to happen down the road in the future to happen that you haven't already predetermined must happen. In other words, nothing untoward must happen that's not within your planning. And they're always planning for the future to make sure that those in power, who have the power, and when I say in power, I mean those who are above politics and who own the politicians, basically, will keep running the power through their families and so on. That's how it's done. Power never gives itself away. It never does that. It just doesn't happen. You know, power has nothing to do with Christianity or anything like that. You know, power is just for power's sake. And those in charge in this day and age, of course, for a long time now, have used all of the sciences on the public to keep the public living in a different reality from the one the elite themselves live in, of course. They give you a reality to make you fearful of living at times, of what might happen. As I say, not a generation has gone by for a long time that it hasn't had threats or real economic crashes planned, of course, and been plundered of all their savings, etc. And or they've had wars to go and fight and get called up that you must go and fight for. Things like that. You're always in conflict, basically. Within yourself, you're fearful. And most folk take the simple explanations that are given to them. No justice is ever really done. We know that. Plato talked about it too. There can only be the appearance of justice. We don't even get much of that these days. But people are constantly told through propaganda and 1,000 sources that regardless of the country they're living in, it's the best country in the world. And Bertrand Russell said that too back in the 50s and 60s when he worked for the global elite and some of the international think tanks of the day that created the culture that we're living in at the present time, including the changes we've been going through and still some to come yet. He was part of that big setting up of the system. But he said that, yeah, we'd all believe, no matter where we lived, we're in the best country in the world, with the best healthcare systems and the best, because government will constantly tell you that over and over and over, and you'll believe it. And it's quite simple, isn't it, to manage perception. It really is so simple. It really, truly is so simple to manage perception. And it's true enough, in this age of constant conflict, where the wars brewing, there's wars being stirred up, right down to probably even the dates when different ones will start, small wars, bigger wars, and so on. And also the present wars that have been had in the go for years and years and years, which we've been involved in across the Middle East. We forget that Gulf War I, in fact, was started immediately after Russia supposedly threw its hands up regarding communism and just became Western. Literally a year later, the US was bombing Baghdad in Gulf War I. So it's never really stopped. It's never really stopped. And since 2001, a generation has been grown up that thinks it's quite normal to have no privacy and that you're being looked after and taken care of by unknown agencies, unseen faces and so on, that manage your lives and your privacy and what you're up to and all the rest of it, and that you can't have any kind of privacy if you want safety. It's been instilled in them. These were obstacles in times gone by, but they've managed to use the threat of war or annihilation to take the rights of people and make them accept it quite happily. Most of them do, quite happily. Especially the young ones. Now we have to think of wars and what's the purpose of war. War, technically, is an extension of the suppression of people abroad that you want to conquer. in order to plunder them by the rulers who already have plundered you at home and become the rulers, basically. Kings, queens, nobility, that kind of thing, you see. There's an extension of the same technique, only this time they convince you that who have had some peace at home, you aren't getting plundered quite as much, maybe, by your rulers. They convince you that now they're there to protect you, you see. So other people are going to protect you, and those who abuse you are also going to protect you. And they'll keep telling you that it's terrible. It's more terrible in that country over yonder. And they'll give you lots and lots of news stories about countries and little places, in fact, across the world, where they might still be even putting people in the pot, stuff like that, for food. And you, oh my God, I wouldn't want that, etc., etc. Isn't that awful? It's so nice here. That kind of thing, you see. And they used Latin America for a long time the same kind of way, by saying, oh, it's always so unstable. But they didn't tell you that the instability was being cooked up by their two opposing forces that really are working for the same boss, the left wing and the right wing, you see. That's how you get the conflict going. And so you have the so-called rebels being financed by the same group at the top, under the pretense of creating a utopia for the general public, which never materializes. And it does materialize for those who end up ruling it, but not for the public. They have a horror show, of course. And then they have the right wing that come in and brutally get back at all the left-wingers that upset their regime for a little while. But it was called coming from the US for a long, long time, the School of the Americas, who trained the different soldiers, special forces and that from Latin America and sent them back again. So to do their stuff. There's a lot of materials out there on it and so on. But that's how they kept the whole place under control, you see, for a long time. And it's the same across the world as well. You cannot, maybe in some sense, the rulers knowing that if it becomes too complacent at home, you see, and you do have a long period of stability at home, people tend to get more uppity. They think, at home that is. They think, well, we should have more rights than we've got already, and so on and so on and so on. And it's easy to stir that kind of thing up as well. And you create groups that never existed before. In fact, nobody would have dreamed of before, even the ones who eventually join it. And you get them to demand more money for their own group, etc. And then you use them against other groups. And again, this is constant conflict. This is how you do it, folks. It doesn't happen by itself. Nothing exists that's not authorized from the top to even start to exist. That's the way it's always been. Nothing gets off the ground in the grassroots unless it's completely authorized by those who already rule. You can't start up a poetry club in a library without them wanting to know the members. And what kind of poetry are they prattling on about? Is it revolutionary poetry, for instance? If it is revolutionary poetry, they might give you a grant. Because that's what we've done for the last 60, 70 years in the West. They'll get grants from your the taxman. That's your government. And they'll get grants as well from the big foundations that run it. So remember, nothing is ever as it is seen at face value. Nothing out there really is. Any group that is formed, any group at all, is either formed to have a particular purpose which is public, and the followers won't even understand. And it will be used by those who rule. And all these existing institutions that were separate to an extent, in some extent that is, are eventually taken over too, for the same system. It might take them 100 years to take over a big institution. It didn't take them too long to take over the church institutions, for instance, for their own purposes. And we saw that repeated again when George Bush Jr. was in. And there's many articles, I read them on the air myself, in the news about the top evangelicals, etc., and ministers being pulled in and offered big sums of money if they get their congregations on board with Bush Jr.'s PNAC group, for war, in the Middle East and so on. And it worked awfully well. It's sad that, isn't it? See, if you join any group, don't leave your brain outside the door when you go in there. Don't do it for it. If you do that, well, sure, if you don't want to use your own brain, if you want someone else to use it and benefit from it, well, fine, on you go. Because every group is going to be used. And if not today, tomorrow. But it will be used. Definitely. It doesn't really matter what kind of thing you set up, or club you create, or even commune, in fact. You'll have conflict within it. It's human nature for dominance, you see. And I've studied quite a bit on the communes, etc. And there's a whole movement behind the creation of them, especially in the US, and all tied in with the folk music back then, and then the early electrical music as well, all tied in together with the hippie movement and all that kind of stuff, where it was going to be peace and love, and everybody would live in harmony, etc., etc., except in actual communes where, yeah, they would share this and share that, and they'd share each other's bodies and share the women and all that, and they'd even share their penicillin. But the thing is, they always had strife from someone who eventually would know how to get disaffection, basically, started amongst the group. The psychopath. A psychopath knows how to manipulate one or two or more people and get them to actually do the complaining and the bitching with another group inside the same group. And then they step forward eventually as a solution, and they become the boss. That's how they do things. They don't like to participate in the fighting themselves. They like everyone else to do the fighting for them. And that's how they get really up. The clever ones, that is, get really up to the top. They smell which way the wind is going. But even in the smallest commune, that same dynamic will take place. So it doesn't matter what you set up. Someone wants to be the boss, you see. There's always someone that thinks they're more important than you. Always, in fact, isn't it? It's strange that, isn't it? And again, you'll find it more so in certain different, even ethnic groups, north, south, a whole bit, because of the different temperatures and how the society evolved. And there's different groups. Some are way more ethnocentric than others in the hotter climates, and the ones in the colder climates tend to be more scattered, and even individually they like their privacy and all the rest of it more so than the natural group type of thing in the hotter climates. That's really how it was. So we've all developed differently, and now we're all getting told we must all live together, you see, and accept whoever puts himself in charge of us, basically, to rule us, be it someone in your own nation or some other power in some other nation that rules the world. That's how it's being presented, such as the EU or a world parliament and things like that. Very old idea by those who already had all the countries fighting each other in the 1800s and even earlier, in fact. Because the whole idea of a British Empire is very old. It goes way back, in fact. I think Francis Bacon was the first guy to actually coin the term. He called it British, B-R-Y, you see. But it's a British Empire. He proposed that could be a role for Britain to spread a system across the world, you see, standardization. And that was picked up by Cecil Rhodes, but it was also picked up by Lord Alfred Milner and even others before them. So there was definitely a subterranean group moving underneath the current, you might say, to get all this established, and using empiricism to do so, the colonial period and all that. Then the US took it over, of course, as the policeman of the world, and they also changed policies in different countries because the countries take so many grants and bribes, basically, to the elites, that every bribe comes with a demand. You must start behaving this way or that way, or whatever it happens to be, or give us more of your resources, etc., or let's start to dictate your foreign policy, and so on, or there's no money. It's quite simple. Money is such an incredibly corrupting factor in everything, isn't it? Well, that's what you must always do. That's what you must always do, is follow the money. It's quite simple. Always follow the money. Who rules the world? Those that borrow the money, like governmental leaders, or the guys that lend the cash to them. And it's not even cash as we know it anymore. It's numbers, isn't it? So everyone basically has to kowtow to the big money boys, the big cabal at the top. That's how it works. But as I say, you cannot possibly even try to get away from it. It'd be nice to get away from it all, wouldn't it? Just escape from it all and go and live in the wild, because if you went with anybody else, conflict would set in eventually. Or the cabin fever would develop and folk would start killing each other. It's the way it goes in society. There's a natural need for some kind of order in all societies, all peoples. And some are better at governing themselves than others within their own system or tribal system. Like some of the American Indians had real democratic systems, real everybody got a say in everything. No one could just put a vote through for themselves, and that was it. Everybody had to follow. Everybody got a say. Everybody got a say. Once you get bigger and bigger, of course, you just can't get that unless you got some intercom system where you can all get involved. But that didn't exist back then, you see. But some tribal chiefs were elected for a set period, and that was it. They were somebody else had to take over. They didn't like this hereditary system so much. That did exist in some tribes, but not in them all. So you got to understand that nothing ever is a complete solution to getting away from anything, because the same system will follow you across the planet, even if you're going to the wilderness. Especially today. I mean, they've got satellites watching everything you do, And don't think they're not. Don't think that it's just the internet and all your electronic mail and your voice and all the rest of it that they're monitoring. And believe you me, it's a total content. Don't believe this nonsense. It's the gross thing. No, it's a total content of what you've ever said, done, printed, or whatever. It's all out there for them. Space is no problem for them as far as hard drives go, believe you me. So the satellites do the same thing, constantly monitoring every part of the planet, and I mean little parts of it too. Little parts. I mentioned it before, that a couple of years ago, I think it was, or a year ago, someone not too far had a little fire on his property, and it wasn't huge. You see, and he had all the gear there to deal with it, and they got it out. 2 or 3 pals got it out, and the fire engine turned up. This is in the country, and this is, well, who phoned you? They didn't think there was any need for it, but because the fire was already out when they arrived. Who phoned you? He says, well, it was noticed on satellite. This small little, I don't know how wide it was, but it wasn't wide at all. It was seen on satellite. So don't think for a minute that you can even, unless you maybe get into some underground system somewhere, like the elites do. They have lots of them just on standby in case they ever need them across the planet. But so don't think you're just going to some little thing and escape, because these guys are everywhere with their systems, everywhere. It's interesting too. I mean, the guys in Vietnam will tell you that the planes used to literally drop all these little dart things. They were microphones in the jungle, and they could put some in trees as well, but they could drop them from aircraft, and anybody passing, it would get the sounds of them passing. You'd hear them talking, what language it was, that kind of thing too. George Orwell had it in 1984, even in the basically the private woods and so on that he and Julia, or that Winston and Julia met, there'd be microphones in the trees, things like that. Microphones everywhere. Now it's video cameras and microphones, and they're so tiny. The combination are so tiny, and the transmission power is so incredible for distance that it's just, and they're cheap to make. So don't think for a minute that, and of course the thing is too, Hollywood keeps churning out all the different escape movies. Because we get escaped outer space or things like that. Well, I've been looking for a used flying saucer for years. I can't find one anywhere. I really just can't find one. And all these ones that claim have been smashed and damaged and fallen out of the sky, I can't get one of them either. I mean, I'd try and fix it up and get out of here, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? That doesn't happen. So in other words, you get more and more fantasy in which to escape, with the more crisis and pressure and fear that's put upon you. It all works together. It's one seamless system. All thought out. Big panels discuss it all. Even right down to what kind of bunch of movies to churn out for the next 2 or 3 years according to the fear level you have. Can you all hack it? Can you handle it, in other words? Can you handle the fear? Or is it getting to that edge where folk are breaking down and going nuts or just cracking up? And so should they churn out more escape movies for you and things like that? Everything's catered to. Everything. I'm not kidding you. The professional teams constantly sussing you out, and some universities are giving all this data to MIT especially to work on with your emails and so on. Yeah, the folk are beginning to get a bit kind of nervous and agitated and kind of crazy at times and cracking up. It's time to give them more and more fantasy, something that will, and sure enough, they'll churn out another series of fantasy that could be a serial series that will last for weeks or months or whatever. And just keep diverting the public. Give them an escape even though it's not even real. Because it does have an effect on them. It does. Yeah. So, as I say, we're really perfectly well managed. And tonight I want to mention the fact of the military think tanks and how they are taught to manage conflicts and future conflicts and so on. And you'll find that the same tactics of psychological warfare which are used upon their possible future enemies are also being used on you all the time. Quite obvious when you understand it. Here, for instance, is an article from the U.S. military, and this is about their vision for the future. This is from a year ago, and this article says, over the past year, the Army has refined its vision, its operating concept, and its strategy for comprehensive change. And here's how they all fit together. This is for 2025 and beyond, you see. And so the velocity of instability continues to increase worldwide. Now remember that the velocity of instability continues to increase worldwide. The instability, remember, number one, is a technique you use before you get the actual physical wars off and going. You use soft power. That's what they mean by their colour revolutions or NGOs that they finance to agitate and get internal rebellions going, things like that. Then they use the hard power later, you see. Always remember that. I've given many talks in the past about it. Go into cuttingthroughmatrix.com and go into the archive section and you'll find countless talks and in-depth stuff on all this over the years. And it says ISIL. Now, they use ISIL here just to get you confused again. Anti-terrorism in Iraq, Syria and Yemen. Anarchy and extremism in North Africa. Russian annexation of Crimea and the use of unconventional land forces in Ukraine. So already you see, for the reader and the general public, you're terrifying the life out of you, or they're trying to, you see. You really need all these, to give more tax money for more weapons and military and all that, because of all these scary scenarios, you see. It says, provocation by North Korea and various emergencies requiring complex humanitarian assistance and disaster relief efforts. Global instability, coupled with the reduction in military capabilities of many of our allies, has emboldened potential adversaries and magnified the risk to the U.S. interests around the world. It's therefore imperative, now more than ever, to field a ready and modern army that is innovative and adaptive and that remains the bedrock of the joint A-Force. The army is meeting the challenge to change itself and improve land power capabilities through a strategy called Force 2025 and beyond. It's our method to prepare the army for the complexities of the global security environment now and in the future, and so on. In May, the Army released its updated Army vision called Strategic Advantage in a Complex World. And I'll put these links up tonight too, if you want to get the PDFs from the military and all the rest of it. So most folk don't read them, by the way, because they can't be bothered. They just want someone to tell them, sum up for me, condense it all. Just give me it in one sentence, no more than 10 words. People actually, that's how they are now. They've no time for anything. especially thinking. But it says here, to be the intellectual foundation for its efforts to prevent conflict, shape security and environment, and win wars. That followed the October release of the new Army operating concept called Win in a Complex World, which discusses how warfighting capabilities combine to fulfill larger missions. That is, how future Army forces, as part of joint inter-organizational, remember it's inter-organizational, and multinational efforts, will operate to accomplish campaign objectives and protect U.S. national interests. Now, why use multinational efforts and so on to protect U.S. national interests? When really the U.S. is the battering ram across the planet for plunder, and has been for a while. They take over from Britain. It says, in turn, shapes and comprehensive effort necessary to achieve the capabilities envisioned in the Army operating concept. Force 2025 and beyond supports decisions at every step from concept and capability development to resource investments and fielding. It offers a framework based on the Army vision and the Army operating concept to evaluate ideas for force development and assumptions on which they're based. It allows Army and civilian leaders alike to properly invest resources in order to adapt, evolve, and innovate. And it synchronizes processes, products, and concepts, and translates them into warfighting capabilities, you see. And it goes on and on and on about all their different evolutionary approaches to develop land power concepts. This is all marketing terminology they're using and so on. Those big marketing companies work full-time for the military too, remember. This is an integrate them along across doctrine, organizations, training, material, development, leadership and education, personnel, facilities, and then they have all this abbreviated to DOTMLPF. Like, well, you say it, you try and say it. Look, read this for yourself. Among his organization initiatives are the Army War Fighting Challenges, a set of enduring first-order problems whose solutions will improve current and future force combat effectiveness. These provide an analytical framework to integrate efforts across war-fighting functions and allow collaboration with key stakeholders in learning activities, modernization, and future force design. I hope none of these marketer characters with all this terminology, who create all this are not sitting there, in charge of armies. Can you imagine trying to get a straight, order out of them? Can you imagine something straight that everybody would understand? Come on. But that's how you get ahead now in all these things. I'm really in psychological operations, and here's some really fancy, very confusing terminology that only the super, initiated and intelligent will understand. And that's the same with all doctrines, isn't it, really? That's how, the first thing you do in medicine is create terminology that no one else understands. Then you're special, you see. If they don't understand it, you're not quite as special. Another is the Force 2025 maneuvers, which execute the important learning activities that help leaders integrate future capabilities and develop interim solutions to warfighting challenges. They talk about logistics, demand reduction, and the integration of robotics and autonomy-enabled systems, and leader, soldier, and team optimization. All you have to do if you really want to get ahead, honestly, even for the guy at the bottom, is learn this terminology and prattle off. Make sure there's an officer listening somewhere. And then they're going about Army War Fighting Assessment, which replaces one of the two network integration evaluations. And it says, over the next 5 years, the Army will focus on adapting while maintaining and improving upon current functionality. So many words to say nothing, eh? But except the word that keeps popping up is adaptive. You're always adapting, you see. Inter-organizational, multinational teams and all the rest of it, all working together. Ever-evolving global security environment. And they even go into cyberspace war, all that kind of stuff, yada, yada, yada. And I don't know why they bother even printing this stuff, except it's to show off their terminology, maybe. But I'll put up tonight as well some of the PDFs to do with all of this kind of stuff. And see what you think of them. One is the Army Vision, Strategic Advantage in a Complex World, U.S. Army. And It's more readable, put it that way. And a lot of it, again, is also to hopefully, they hope, detracts people into the military. That's always, there's nice glossy pictures and things. Everything's really lovely, and they don't have any dead bodies anywhere. So it's quite interesting. You too can be a man and be a somebody. Well, your country has very little jobs left for the working class. So join the military and be somebody and get some respect, because no one in the system, and everyone's taught that, no one's taught to have any respect for someone that isn't working. Isn't that wonderful? So the more unemployed they get, the more people will join the military. You can guarantee then, if you're going to keep a depression going, which it really is a depression for, say, 30, 40 years, you can get a lot of wars accomplished in 30 or 40 years. Britain did it all the time. Until now, there's a constant depression, really. In many ways, this psychological too complete depression has been for a long, long time. So, as I say, I'll put this up and let you read it. But yeah, lots of nice pictures and all that. And you see guys sitting behind all their technology consoles and yada, yada, yada. And then the PR ones with little native boys in different countries. And, the usual stuff, kind of handing out chocolates and all that old stuff. Remember the old stuff? But that's what you get, you see. You get that kind of stuff all the time, don't you? You really do. And also, when I put up NATO Summit Guide Warsaw 2016, and it's quite interesting too. There's a lot in it that you'll have to go through, no doubt, because, and again, they know too that most folk won't even bother reading this stuff, because this is all your life you're wasting away. And again, when you get 90-odd% in the words, it's just superfluous. Why can't they just sum it up in a small thing, you see? Well, because these big think tanks and so on are getting paid an awful lot of money to write this stuff. That's why. Everything you create ends up with a panel and like a little bureaucracy, or even a little government at the top, and they want big, big money. Yeah. Anyway, and this article here says the NRF is based on a rotational system where allied nations commit land, air, maritime, or special operations forces units for a period of 12 months. It's open to partner countries once approved by the North Atlantic Council, you see, which runs NATO. It says participation in the NRF is preceded by national preparation, followed by training with other participants in a multinational force. As units rotate through the NRF, the associated high standards, concepts and technologies are gradually spread throughout the alliance, thereby fulfilling one of the key purposes of the NATO response force, the further transformation of allied forces. Operational command of the NRF alternates between Allied Joint Forces commands in Brunsum, the Netherlands and Naples, Italy. JFC Brunson has command of the NRF for 2016. I mean, remember too, NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Remember that. That was created under the United Nations. And the United Nations also created the Warsaw Pact countries with their treaties and so on. So it ran both sides of it. The UN ran both sides of the Cold War. For those who don't quite know that. That's not clever, eh? And they weren't just a referee, they ran both sides of it. In fact, during the whole Cold War, it was always a Russian officer who was put in charge for the United Nations for their military strategies. Always. That was part of the treaty. It's quite something. Anyway, it says here that it's a powerful package and so on. Lots of PR words in here and terminology and so on. And high readiness, joint task forces and etc., etc. But as I say, this is quite something you have to really plough through for yourselves. They go through about how they protected the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens, Greece, were deployed to support the Afghan presidential elections September the same year. It's been used in disaster relief. Now remember NATO too, never mind this NRF, NATO was involved in bombing Libya. And they gave the French the first, the glory of, dropping the bombs on the people. So, what's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that was meant solely to protect the countries involved against the Soviet countries during the Cold War. What are they doing over in North Africa, bombing Libya and places like that? It's never been answered. In other words, they broke their own laws and so on. But then laws at the top are always broken. Always broken. They'll never admit even when they're doing it, but never admit it. They just go ahead and do it, And we sit back not knowing in our utter ignorance that they are breaking laws and rules and so on. In fact, we don't even ask why they're even bombing a country like that. Most folk don't. It's not an awful shame. We don't even ask who they're bombing and why. Who are they bombing now? East Asia, West Asia? Who is it? We're all trained, you see. We're trained to sit back and just shut off from all the wars that they're starting and altering and shaping and say nothing. Just go into your entertainment and escape, Entertainment, you see. But don't interfere with what your country's up to. You really, when you think about it, let's be honest, democracy is a joke. In the previous PDF I read, was the last week before, they talked about that. Actually, it was in the Parameters magazine. And constant conflict. And how the whole big thing would be, how they'd be openly discussed now. And now, in the years to come, this whole idea of democracy was just a joke and a useful tool for those who rule. And it's never been more true as it is today. Never, ever. But we're trained. Here's a little thing. Ed Bernays, the guy who didn't invent this whole idea of supermarketing and advertising and he didn't invent that himself. There was a whole team pre-existing long before he came along in the same kind of merchant banking lineage who always studied the peoples, you see. How do you alter the people's behavior? How do you make them buy your products, for instance? And they always knew, using basic study of humanity, just watching humanity down through centuries and centuries and merchandising. You can always sell clothing to the women, you see. Always. And you can always update or change the style of the clothing to women. And they're the first to go along with it and want it and want whatever no matter what it is, if you can market it properly with the proper models, they'll want it. They'll wear it no matter how ridiculous it even looks. And in other words, you have a natural sexual drive, folks. Natural sexual drive. Use it. Use that to exploit the people to spend money and buy your products. And they put that whole idea into everything. The car, they've got ads there with the car. And you see the woman in the car from 1940s or 50s saying, oh my goodness, And the salesman saying yes, and the whole length of the car is 2 or 3 inches bigger than last year's model. That's all out there, folks. I'm not making it up. And this is all Bernays' idea. Use the subconscious forces that are always at work in people's minds and that drive them, all these drives, use them against the people themselves, exploit them and wring the money out of them, you see. And he also said too, at Bernays, remember he worked for governments as well. He even, as a young man, was sent off as one of the top fellows in the League of Nations with President Wilson. Strange honor to get, isn't it? As a very young guy, early 20s. There are connections, folks, and there are certain things existing long before that. But Bernays, one of the greatest things when you study his works, said, rather than improve your product, because you see at one time, many companies would sell their products on their name. It was word of mouth, and believe you me, if you made a duff or rotten product, the word would get around very quickly to people, word of mouth, and they stopped buying your product. So the idea was the companies would go to them and say, well, how can we make cheaper made products but get more money for them And boy, it's quite simple. Through marketing, massive marketing, you can overcome the obstacles, because lies will prevail over the truth, you see. Just constant lies. Oh, much better, lighter, blah, blah. And give it a better, shinier coat of paint or something. But the product itself is cheaper to make, cheaper products to put together, and it'll fall apart in a year or two, like we have today. That's what it will have today. Bernays said, rather than improve your products according to the customer's demands, change the habits of your customer. Change their behavior to suit your product. Oh, wow, what a winner that has been. Because it's across the board, folks. Till folk today buy something, even vacuum cleaners, if it lasts them a year and a half, to think, well, it's old now. If it busts, oh, it's old now. And they toss it out. But they'll say, wait a minute, this piece of recycled plastic garbage cost me XXX, you see. But nope, they've trained the whole public that. Disposable society. But we're disposable in so many ways. We dispose of our partners, we dispose of our parents, shove them in homes. We dispose, you see. We're totally ruled. Everything that was normal has been broken apart, conquered, and bust up. Yep. Now we're dysfunctional. Now we get constantly reprogrammed with what any new normal is, and we accept it, you see. Quite clever. Well, that was all Bernays' teaching method. Bernays hated, according to his own sister, I think it was his sister or a wife, but there's a documentary out there, and she says he hated the general public because it was just too easy to manipulate them. He had no respect for them. Now I'm just going to skip to this one on basically Winning a Complex World PDF for the military. And in the preface it says, from the commanding general, the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, one of our most important duties as Army professionals is to think clearly about the problem of future armed conflict. This is because our vision of the future must drive change to ensure that Army forces are prepared to prevent conflict, shape the security environment, and win wars. The purpose of the Army operating concept is to ask big questions, not focus on small answers. And it says, the concept for the first time focuses on all three levels of war: tactical, operational, and strategic. It says that environment the Army will operate in is unknown. The enemy is unknown. The location is unknown. And the coalitions involved are unknown. The problem we're facing on is how to win in a complex world. That's a big thing. It's been for quite a few years now. I think it was Cheney gave a speech on the known knowns and the unknown knowns and known unknowns and unknown knowns and on they went like this long spiel, And in other words, these think tanks are always planning for the future. You see, and let's be honest, to everyone's economics. Again, for the guys who rule your country and own your country, for those who want more minerals, oil, whatever it happens to be in different parts of the world. It says, when it occurs at the strategic level, it involves more than just firepower. It involves the application of all elements of national power. Complex is defined as an environment that is not only unknown, but unknowable and constantly changing. The Army cannot predict who it will fight, where it will fight, and with what coalition it will fight. To win the complex world, Army forces must provide the joint force with multiple options, integrate with efforts of multiple partners. It sounds very promiscuous, doesn't it? Operate across multiple domains and present our enemies and adversaries with multiple dilemmas. See, it is also psychological war. Now, when I'm reading this stuff, I hope you're understanding this technique through different think tanks, all connected together. I'll also use these strategies back home on you. All right? Present our enemies and adversaries with multiple dilemmas. Right? So here's multiple dilemmas. The key to a strategic win. This is through all the game theories that they're using for military. And this is a military one, but as I say, it applies to you too, because guys on this team here will also be part of the psychological warfare teams that are working on you at the moment back home. Win, and this is in all countries, all use the same techniques. Win is to present the enemy with multiple dilemmas. To compel enemy actions requires putting something of value to them at risk, right? Now, you think about it too. We're to protect you at home. But you can't have freedom. Something you value. You know. Can't have freedom, right? Or if you want some privacy, stop using your cell phones. Well, no. If I use a cell phone, they're going to know everything I do every day, sort of thing. Etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. Army forces will allow joint force commanders to dictate the terms of operations and render enemies incapable of responding effectively. You see, that's the purpose of creating multiple dilemmas. I've given talks on this from psychological tests and evaluations I've done over many years before, where the average person can't hold in their mind more than 2 to 3 really dreadful problems that have to be resolved or worked on or whatever at the same time. They can't do it. 3 things at the same time. They'll crack up if it's over 3, you see. A lot of folk will crack up at 2. So you do that with your enemies, and that makes them makes them incapable of even making good decisions when you give them multiple crises, one after another at the same time or whatever. Oh, you're going to lose your job, possibly. Oh, you're going to get blown up in the streets by radical whatever, possibly. Oh, you're going to crash the economy, possibly. You see, on and on and on it goes until you're just like you see. Then out comes Hollywood with all its fantasy and its indoctrination, because they all work together. So it says here. It says joint combined arms operations allows joint force commanders to operate consistent with the tenet of initiative, dictating the terms of operations and rendering the enemy incapable of responding. You can't respond when you're in shock, you see, from about umpteen different possible threats at the same time. Future forces operating as part of joint teams will conduct expeditionary maneuver through rapid deployment and transition to operations. Units possess the ability to operate dispersed over wide areas because they're able to integrate intelligence and operations to develop situational understanding through action. While possessing the mobility to concentrate rapidly, future forces conduct operations consistent with the tenet of adaptability, anticipating dangers and opportunities and adjusting operations to seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. Additionally, army forces present the enemy with multiple dilemmas because they possess the simultaneity to overwhelm the enemy physically and psychologically, the depth to prevent enemy forces from recovering, and the endurance to sustain operations. So just give them so many ultimate problems hitting them at the same time. Each one could lead to a disaster or could be a disaster, and they're rendered useless, basically. You see. Well, you train your own psychological teams to keep throwing the stuff out there as their enemy is going under. And they go through multiple options, how to set the theatre and shape security environments and so on. In other words, if you want to have conflict, you make sure that you are in charge of everything that's going to be discussed by your enemy, you put out there, and so it's all part of your terminology, part of what you've envisaged and so on, and they must start to use your terminology, and they can't think for themselves anymore. That's a secret of words, you see. It's a part of the secret of words. And multiple domains is another one too. Multiple partners. American military power is joint power. How combatant and joint forces commanders combine land, air, maritime space and cyberspace capabilities give the US forces a competitive advantage over enemies and adversaries. Developing the future force, and so on and so on. And then they go on to talk about more stuff in detail again too. I'll put these PDFs up for you to look at. They're nice little charts too. I love these little flow charts and little arrows pointing at things and all that. You know, they really that's how everything works today, isn't it? Don't think for yourself. Get a flow chart. It's kind of like the movie Idiocracy when the guy goes into the hospital That's where things are now, isn't it? It's kind of scary. It's kind of scary. But folk can't think for themselves. Even trained professionals, they got to look at little arrows pointing at things. And often it's wrong, you see. Well, there you go. So, I put some of the nice charts up too. It's in the PDF. And winning a complex world logic chart. Wow. And it's got all the different generals' names and so on, who was involved in this. And as I say, this is the short abbreviated term for the whole thing is TRADOC, TRADOC, pamphlet 525-3-1. And this is the stuff that's churned out all the time. Now Britain does the same thing for the NATO countries. So remember this, America's part of NATO too, so they all use the same different thing. Well, think tanks with slightly different spins, very, very slightly. In other words, they're tailor-made maybe for that particular nation's psychology. That's about all. But it's all the same agenda, isn't it? It's rather sad when you look at all the different treaties we've had over the years and the wars they've created. Many of the Americans, the early Americans, realized this too, that that's how Britain used its wars and its treaties. That's also what Napoleon talked about Britain and how perfidious it was. It would make treaties with one nation. This is how the meaning of balance of power. If they saw one nation rising up rather, powerfully economically and so on, they would get the one next door to it and finance them, stir it up and get them to go to war with them. And with Britain's backing, through a treaty of course, Britain would join this smaller country, back them financially and all that, and put them into debt and then rule them. But in the meantime, they'd also put the country that was growing it up to a bigger power, put them under by the cost of war. That's how they defeated them. That's what they mean by balance of power. And that's what the US does today too. I mean, across the whole Middle East, they had nothing to do, remember, nothing to do with 9/11. And that was admitted during the inquiry with Bush Jr. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. He's just a bad man and his world's better off without him. That was his statement, very callous, and every law in the book had been broken, but nobody bothered, and it's just wipe out country after country, you see. But of course there's another reason that took out those countries, apart from grabbing all the oil, and we know what they are. Of course we know what they are. Who benefits? What nation was in danger, possibly in the future, around that region, you see. And look at the fallout, the blowback we've had. It's still going on and on and on and on and on. And it will continue, I think, for a long, long, long time, until there's nothing left of countries that they'll have to move into, basically. This is all planned to change the whole planet, you see. That's what it's for. Sad, isn't it? Very sad. But after this depressing talk, you can all go into watch some good fantasy from Hollywood. Yeah, you can do that. Or you can play some virtual reality game and pretend you're some monster with a tail, whatever turns you on there, folks. That's the world they give you, total fantasy. And believe you me, this fantasy, that kind of fantasy ain't going to help you. Ain't going to help you. But it's sure renders so many people ineffective. And that's the purpose of it, isn't it? You keep looking for escapism, and there's no end of escapism out there for you to delve into. Whatever your particular niche is, they've got a room full of escapisms just for you. You see?
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti-Media Radio